Evan had lived alone on his ranch for so many years that silence had become a normal part of his life. People in town knew him as the quiet man who minded his own business, paid his bills on time, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. His ranch stretched far across empty land, surrounded by low hills and dry grass that moved only when the wind passed through. Some days, the only sounds he heard were the creaking of the barn door and the soft steps of his old horse walking around the yard. Evan didn't complain. After losing his parents and seeing his closest friends move away, he simply learned to accept loneliness as part of life. The winter that year was rough. The nights dropped colder than usual, and the wind carried dust like it wanted to scrape the land clean. Evan had spent most of that day fixing a broken fence and checking on the cattle. By late evening, he was exhausted. He sat by the fireplace with a cup of hot coffee, listening to the crackling wood. His old dog, Rusty, lay beside him, sleeping peacefully. Nothing seemed special about the night. Evan expected it to pass like every other, quiet, uneventful, and empty. But around midnight, everything changed. It started with a faint noise. A dull, weak banging sound carried through the cold air and reached his front door. Evan lifted his head slowly, unsure if he heard right. Rusty woke up too, ears raised, staring at the door with confusion. The banging came again, soft but urgent, like someone had little strength left. Evan stood up, heart beating a little faster. People rarely visited his ranch, and never at this hour. He walked toward the door, each step slow and cautious. When he opened it, a freezing gust of wind pushed into the house, followed by something that startled him completely. A man was standing there, barely standing. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and his breath coming out in painful gasps. Snowflakes clung to his shoulders, and his hands trembled like he had been out in the cold for hours. Evan had never seen him before. The stranger looked up with tired, desperate eyes and whispered, "I beg you, make it quick." Then he collapsed forward into Evan's arms. For a moment, Evan froze. His mind couldn't understand what the man meant. Make what quick? Why ask something like that? But when the man fell against him, Evan felt the heavy weight of someone who had reached the limit of suffering. The stranger wasn't asking for harm. His voice carried fear, weakness, and pain. He believed he was close to death and didn't want to suffer slowly. Evan quickly dragged him inside, shutting the door against the cold. The man's body felt icy, almost lifeless. Rusty barked softly, circling around them in worry. Evan laid the stranger on the couch near the fireplace and hurried to throw more wood into the flames. The room brightened as the fire grew stronger. Kneeling beside the stranger, Evan touched his forehead. It was freezing. The man shivered violently, his teeth chattering. Evan removed the torn jacket and realized there was something worse. A large patch of dried blood on the side of the man's shirt. A dark red stain spread across the fabric. "You've been hurt," Evan muttered, more to himself than to the stranger. He rushed to a small wooden cabinet where he kept basic medical supplies and returned with a cloth, warm water, and bandages. He carefully lifted the man's shirt, and what he saw made him tighten his jaw. A crude bandage had been wrapped around the man's waist, stained heavily. Whoever bandaged it had done so in a hurry. Evan worked calmly, cleaning the wound and replacing the dirty bandage with a fresh one. The stranger winced, but didn't fully wake. He kept mumbling random words: fear, cold, footsteps, and something about men chasing him. Evan covered him with 2 thick blankets and placed a warm towel on his chest to help him breathe. Slowly, the man's shaking eased. Rusty stopped barking and instead lay close to the couch, as if trying to give the stranger warmth too. Minutes felt like an hour as Evan waited for the man to regain some strength. Eventually, the stranger opened his eyes slightly. They were tired eyes, filled with hopelessness. Where am I?" he whispered. Evan sat beside him. "You're safe. You're in my home. The man swallowed weakly, struggling to speak. I thought I wouldn't make it. You almost didn't, Evan said honestly. What happened to you? The man closed his eyes again, breathing slowly. I was running. They wouldn't leave me alone. Who? Evan asked. But the stranger shook his head lightly, as if he didn't have the strength to explain yet. Evan didn't push him. He helped the man sit up slightly and made him drink warm water. The stranger drank a few sips before leaning back, exhausted. After some time, he finally spoke again. My name is Caleb, he said weakly. I didn't mean to come here. I saw lights. I thought someone lived here. I hoped someone would help me, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to die slow in the cold. His breathing trembled. That's why I said those words. Evan understood now. Caleb wasn't asking for anything wrong. He was asking for help in the only way his mind could think of during that moment of fear. You're not dying, Evan said firmly. You need rest, warmth, and food. You'll be fine if we take care of that wound. Caleb looked confused. You're helping me? Even though you don't know me? I'm not going to leave you out in the cold. Evan replied simply. That's not something a person should do. A tear escaped Caleb's eye. He wasn't crying from pain, it was something else. Relief. Gratitude. The feeling of receiving kindness after a long period of fear. I thought people didn't care anymore, Caleb whispered. Evan didn't reply to that. He simply adjusted the blankets, placed another log on the fire, and made sure Caleb felt safe. For the first time in years, Evan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't a normal night. It wasn't a normal situation. A stranger had appeared at his doorstep, half frozen and terrified. And now Evan found himself responsible for a life besides his own. As the storm outside grew stronger, Evan stayed awake beside Caleb, watching over him. The man kept drifting in and out of sleep, sometimes mumbling, sometimes shivering. Evan made sure the fire never died, adjusting blankets and checking the wound again when needed. Rusty occasionally nudged Caleb's hand, as if sensing his weakness and wanting to comfort him. Near dawn, Caleb suddenly reached for Evan's sleeve with trembling fingers. Please, don't let them find me. Evan leaned closer. Who? Caleb swallowed, a look of fear crossing his face. Men who want me gone. They think I know something. Something I shouldn't. Evan's eyes narrowed slightly. You're safe here. Nobody is going to find you tonight. Caleb stared at him with weak hope, then slowly drifted into sleep again. Evan sat back, watching him. He didn't know who Caleb was or what danger followed him, but one thing was clear. This man had suffered enough, and whatever chase he had escaped from was not over. The part ends with Evan noticing something. The crude bandage he removed earlier wasn't from an accident. The cut was deep and deliberate, like someone tried to harm Caleb on purpose. The realization hit Evan hard. This wasn't just a wounded traveler. This was a man running from real danger, and that danger might soon reach Evan's ranch. The morning light slowly entered Evan's living room, touching the floor and the walls with a soft, golden glow. The storm outside had finally settled, leaving a cold silence across the ranch. Evan didn't sleep the whole night. He stayed near the fireplace, checking on Caleb every few minutes. The stranger's breathing had grown more stable, and his face looked a little warmer now that the fire had burned through the long night. When Caleb finally opened his eyes again, he looked confused at first, as if unsure where he was. Then he saw Evan sitting on the chair beside him. Somehow, that sight made him relax. You're still here, Caleb whispered, his voice rough from exhaustion. Of course I'm here, Evan replied gently. You needed help. Caleb tried to sit up but winced from the pain in his side. Evan quickly supported him with one hand. Easy, he said. You're not healed yet. Caleb took a deep breath and leaned back again. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then let out a shaky sigh. "I didn't think I would wake up," he said softly. "Last night, I really thought that was it." Evan didn't respond right away. He poured warm water into a cup and helped Caleb drink. The stranger drank slowly, as if every sip brought some life back into him. After a moment of silence, Caleb spoke again. "You must be wondering what happened to me." Evan nodded. "Yes, but only tell me when you're ready." Caleb fell quiet for a long time. His hands trembled slightly under the blanket, not from the cold, but from remembering something painful. Eventually, he gathered the courage to speak. "I worked in a small town south from here," he began. "A quiet place. I was a bookkeeper for a shipping company. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, just numbers and papers." His voice cracked as he continued. "One day, I found something unusual in the company's shipment records. They were moving supplies that were never listed. Large amounts of things that didn't make sense. I asked my supervisor about it, but he got angry and told me to mind my own business." Evan listened carefully, not interrupting, letting Caleb take his time. "I thought maybe I made a mistake. But the numbers didn't lie. So I checked again, carefully. And that's when I realized the company was mixed up in something illegal." Caleb took a deep breath. "They were transporting stolen goods, expensive equipment, tools, even medicine that was meant for hospitals." Evan frowned. "And you told someone?" Caleb nodded. "I reported it quietly to a local officer I trusted. Or, at least I thought I could trust him." Evan already had a guess what happened next. Caleb swallowed hard, his eyes filled with regret. He was working with them. The moment he received my report, he told the company. That night, I went home and found 3 men waiting inside my house. They told me to forget what I saw. They said I had one last chance to stay quiet. "And you didn't?" Evan asked softly. Caleb shook his head. "I refused. I told them I wasn't going to help them get away with it. That's when everything went wrong. Any two. I have the furses." He pulled the blanket aside slightly, pointing weakly at his bandaged wound. "One of them did this. They left me there, thinking I would be too scared to speak again. But I knew I had to run." Evan took in the story with quiet seriousness. There was no doubt Caleb wasn't lying. His fear, his wounds, his exhaustion, everything matched his words. "So you ran all the way here?" Evan asked. "Not at first," Caleb replied. "I hid for a day in an abandoned shed. When night came, I started walking north. I didn't know where to go. I only knew I needed to get far from that town." His voice shook. "Those men have connections. They could easily find me if I stayed anywhere too close." As he spoke, Caleb's hands tightened on the blanket. "I walked for hours," he continued. "My wound kept opening. I lost a lot of strength. At some point, I just collapsed on the road. I thought I was done, but then I saw a faint light far away." He looked at Evan with tired eyes. "It was your ranch." Evan remembered how Caleb stood at his door, frozen and trembling, barely able to speak. "When I reached your porch," Caleb whispered, "I thought I wouldn't survive long enough for help. That's why I said those words. I was scared." Evan placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, comforting him. "I know. You don't have to explain anymore." Caleb's eyes filled with tears he quickly wiped away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your home." "You didn't bring trouble," Evan said quietly. "You brought the truth. And sometimes, the truth needs a place to rest." Caleb seemed surprised by Evan's words. Most people would have pushed him away or called the sheriff without waiting. But Evan wasn't like most people. He understood what fear and loneliness felt like. He knew what it meant to face something overwhelming with no one to stand beside you. Evan stood up and walked to the kitchen. He prepared a simple breakfast, warm broth and soft bread, because Caleb needed something gentle on his weak stomach. When he placed the tray on the small table near the couch, Caleb looked at the food as if he hadn't eaten in days. "Eat slowly," Evan reminded him. Caleb nodded and began eating cautiously. Each bite seemed to give him more strength. Evan sat nearby, keeping an eye on him. After a few minutes, Caleb asked quietly, "Do you believe me?" "Yes," Evan answered, without hesitation. Caleb stared at him, surprised. "Most people wouldn't." "I'm not most people," Evan said calmly. A small, tired smile appeared on Caleb's face for the first time. As Caleb continued eating, Evan walked to the window out of habit. The view outside looked peaceful. The land covered in frost, the sky clear and pale blue. But something bothered him. The calm felt too fragile. Caleb's story kept echoing in his mind. Men willing to harm someone to hide their crimes. Men who could follow Caleb even across far distances. What if they come here? Evan wondered silently. Just as the thought passed through his mind, he heard Caleb's voice behind him. "They won't stop looking for me," Caleb said quietly, as if reading Evan's thoughts. "Not until they're sure I can't speak." Evan turned around. Caleb had stopped eating and was staring at the fireplace with a troubled expression. "You don't have to stay here long," Caleb added weakly. "I'll try moving again when I can walk properly. I don't want to put you in danger." Evan walked back and sat down near him. "You're not going anywhere until you're healed. And no one is coming inside this house without going through me first." Caleb looked at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Why are you helping me so much?" "Grat-it." Evan didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath. "Because I know what it feels like to have nobody. And because what happened to you is wrong." Caleb swallowed the lump in his throat. He wasn't used to kindness that didn't ask for something in return. He wasn't used to someone believing him without doubt. The fire crackled softly as the two men sat there in shared silence. After some time, Evan checked the wound again. It looked cleaner now, though still painful. The fresh bandage held well. Caleb watched him work, feeling safe in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. "You'll recover," Evan assured him. "You just need time." Caleb nodded, though worry stayed on his face. "What if they find this place?" Evan looked him in the eye. "If they do, we'll deal with it. You're not alone anymore." Those words hit Caleb deeply. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the fire and Evan's presence ease his fear. But even as the sun rose peacefully over the ranch, Evan knew the quiet morning wouldn't last forever. Caleb's story wasn't just a sad memory. It was a warning. A sign that danger was moving somewhere out there, possibly even closer than they thought. And Evan, who had lived quietly for years, quietly realized something life-changing. He was now involved in something much bigger than himself. The next morning began quietly. Almost too quietly. Evan stepped outside to feed his animals, while Caleb rested inside the house. The cold air bit against his skin, but he ignored it. His thoughts were occupied by the story Caleb told him. A normal man, trapped in something dangerous, hunted by people who wanted to silence him. That reality didn't leave Evan's mind for a single second. The sun rose slowly behind the hills, lighting up the frost-covered ground. Evan checked the chicken coop, the horses, and the cattle, trying to continue his routine as if nothing had changed. But in the back of his mind, he kept remembering the tired look in Caleb's eyes when he asked, "What if they find me?" Evan didn't have a full answer yet, but he knew one thing. He would protect Caleb no matter what. Rusty trotted close behind him, more alert than usual. The dogs sniffed the air constantly, ears raised. Evan noticed but didn't think much of it. Animals sensed things before humans did, but he hoped it was nothing more than leftover fear from the storm. By the time he finished his chores, Evan felt uneasy. The land looked peaceful, blue sky, quiet trees, and open fields, But something didn't feel right. He stepped back into the house and removed his coat. Caleb tried to sit up on the couch, looking a little better but still weak. "You moving around too much already?" Evan asked lightly. Caleb gave a tired smile. "Just trying to feel human again." Evan helped him sit comfortably and handed him a warm bowl of soup. Caleb ate slowly, grateful for every bite. "You slept some." "That's good." Caleb nodded. "I feel a little stronger. But I can't stop thinking about them. The men who hurt me." Evan pulled a chair closer. "They won't find you easily." Caleb looked uncertain. "You don't understand. They're not normal workers. They're connected. They know how to track people." Evan's jaw tightened. "If they come here, I'll handle it." Caleb swallowed hard. "I don't want you to get into trouble because of me." Evan leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "You came to my door half dead. I'm not going to turn my back on you." Caleb looked down, emotion overwhelming him. Before either man could speak further, Rusty suddenly barked, loud, sharp, and urgent. Evan stiffened. That bark wasn't random. Rusty only barked like that when something unfamiliar approached the property. Evan walked to the window and parted the curtain just enough to see outside. His face slowly hardened. Riders. 4 of them. Men on horses, moving steadily toward his ranch. Their clothes looked rugged, dark, and dusty, like they had been riding for hours. They weren't from around this area, Evan could tell by the way they held themselves, moving with intent, not curiosity. His heart beat faster, but his mind stayed calm. He turned to Caleb. "Stay down. Don't move. Don't talk. Don't stand near the window." Caleb's face turned pale instantly. "It's them, isn't it?" "I don't know yet," Evan said. "But we're going to be careful." Caleb sank lower on the couch, his body trembling slightly. Evan walked to his old wooden cabinet and quietly took out the rifle he kept for livestock protection. He didn't load it to harm anyone, he just needed to make sure the riders didn't step inside without permission. Rusty continued barking until Evan commanded him softly. The dog obeyed, though reluctantly. Moments later, the riders reached the front of the house. Evan stepped onto the porch, holding the rifle down by his side. Not in a threatening manner, but in a way that said he was not helpless. The wind blew lightly, and dust rose around the horses' hooves. The lead rider, a tall man with a long coat, nodded at Evan. "Morning," he said, though his tone didn't feel friendly. "Morning," Evan replied evenly. "We're looking for someone," the rider said, adjusting his hat. "A man. Ran from trouble. Seen anyone pass through?" Evan's expression didn't change. "No one's been here except me." The rider studied him, searching for any crack in his calm manner. "These parts are quiet. Long way from town," another rider added. "Not many places to hide." Evan kept his voice steady. The riders exchanged glances. The tall one spoke again. "We just want to look around. Make sure everything's clear." Evan's grip tightened subtly. "My property isn't open for strangers to wander through." Another rider leaned forward slightly. "If the man we're looking for is here, he's dangerous. You'd want to know that, wouldn't you?" Evan didn't blink. "I haven't seen any dangerous man, and I take care of myself just fine." A long moment passed. The air felt thick. Even the horses sensed the tension, shifting their weight uneasily. The tall rider narrowed his eyes. "You sure you're alone?" "Positive," Evan answered. A crow cawed in the distance, one small sound breaking the silence. Inside the house, Caleb lay still, his heart racing. He could hear faint voices through the walls. Every word filled him with fear. "What if Evan gets hurt because of me?" he thought. Outside, the riders didn't leave right away. They looked around the yard slowly, trying to spot footprints, items out of place, anything that hinted at another person. Evan blocked their view of the house as much as possible. Finally, The tall rider sighed. If you see anyone, especially a man traveling injured, you let us know. Evan nodded once. If I see someone suspicious, I'll handle it. The rider smirked a little, unable to tell if Evan meant that as cooperation or a warning. But he didn't push further. Let's go, he ordered his group. The riders turned their horses and rode away, kicking up dust behind them. Evan watched them until they disappeared down the long dirt path. Only then did he slowly exhale. He walked back inside. Caleb sat up slightly, his face pale and eyes wide. They were here, weren't they? Caleb whispered. Evan nodded. Yes. Caleb ran a shaky hand through his hair. They won't stop. If they think I'm nearby, they'll keep coming back. Evan sat down beside him. You heard what they wanted. They were looking for someone injured. They think you're still running. We? Caleb's voice cracked. I'm putting your life at risk. Evan shook his head. I've lived a lonely life for years. If helping you means standing up to a few men, then that's what I'll do. And well, Caleb's eyes filled with tears. Why? You don't know me. I'm just a stranger who showed up at your door. You're a human being who needed help, Evan replied. That's enough. The fire in the fireplace burned steadily, warming the room. But the air carried a weight neither of them could ignore. The riders would return. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in a few hours, but they wouldn't give up easily. Caleb leaned back and closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Evan walked to the window again, watching the road, thinking quietly. Whatever trouble Caleb had been running from was now crossing into Evan's life too. But for the first time in years, Evan didn't feel alone. He felt responsible, stronger, more awake. Something inside him knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The riders did not return for the rest of the day, but the quiet did not bring comfort. Instead, it felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Evan stayed close to the windows, watching the long dirt road that led to his ranch. Caleb rested on the couch, still weak but more alert than before. His eyes followed every movement Evan made, worry written clearly across his face. As afternoon turned into evening, Evan finally sat down across from Caleb. The warm glow from the fireplace painted soft shadows across the room, giving everything a calm look. Yet both men knew the calm wasn't real. Evan, Caleb said softly, this isn't going to stop on its own. Evan nodded slowly. Caleb took a shaky breath. They're going to come back. Maybe with more people. Maybe with fewer words. They don't want to scare me anymore, they want to silence me. Evan rested his hands on his knees and leaned forward. Then, we need to do something before that happens. Caleb stared at him anxiously. I don't want you caught in the middle. You already brought me into the middle, Evan said gently. Last night, when you knocked on my door, this stopped being just your fight. Caleb looked down, guilt and gratitude mixing in his expression. I didn't mean to bring danger to your home. You didn't ask for any of this. Maybe I didn't, Evan said. But I'm not the kind of man who watches someone suffer and walks away. Caleb swallowed hard. It took him a long moment before he looked up again. So, what do? We clear your name, Evan answered simply. We take this to someone who isn't part of their group. Someone fair. Caleb looked doubtful. Who? Everyone in that town either works with them or fears them. Evan stood and walked to his small wooden desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out a worn notebook with a name written on the cover, Sheriff Alden. Caleb read it silently, confused. He's the sheriff in the next county, Evan explained. A good man. Honest. He's helped me in the past with livestock issues and disputes with neighbors. Never took a bribe. Never ignored the law. Caleb's eyes filled with cautious hope. You think he'll listen? If I tell him the truth, yes, Evan said firmly. And I'll ride out tonight to reach him before morning. Caleb immediately shook his head. No. Absolutely not. If those riders are still near the area, they'll spot you on the road. You'll be walking into danger. Evan placed the notebook on the table. Caleb, if we stay here and do nothing, the danger will come to us anyway. Caleb didn't argue because he knew it was true. Silence filled the room again, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Finally, Caleb whispered, "Let me come with you." "You can't," Evan said gently. "You can barely stand without holding on to something." Caleb clenched his jaw, frustrated at his own weakness. "I don't want you going alone." "I won't be alone," Evan said with a faint smile. "Rusty will be with me." The dog, hearing his name, lifted his head from the floor and wagged his tail once. Caleb managed a weak smile too, but worry still clouded his face. Evan reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I'll be careful. I promise." That night, Evan prepared quietly. He saddled his horse, packed a small bag with water and food, and filled a lantern with fresh oil. Rusty followed him closely, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Before leaving, Evan checked all the windows and made sure the doors were secure. Caleb watched from the couch, fighting the urge to beg him to stay. But he saw a determined strength in Evan's eyes, something calm, steady, and unshakable. "Come back safe," Caleb said in a low voice. "I will," Evan replied. "Keep the fire going, and rest." Evan stepped outside into the cold night air, the stars bright overhead. Rusty trotted beside him as he mounted his horse. With one last glance toward the warm light shining from his house window, Evan rode out into the dark. The journey was long and quiet, the road lit only by the lantern hanging from the saddle. Evan kept alert, watching the shadows, listening for footsteps or horses. But the night remained still. After hours of careful riding, he reached the small sheriff's office in the next county just before dawn. Sheriff Alden, though surprised to see Evan at such an hour, welcomed him inside immediately. He trusted Evan. Everyone did. Evan was a man who never caused trouble and never lied. "What happened?" Sheriff Alden asked, concerned. Evan explained everything. Caleb's job, the illegal shipments, the corrupt officer, the attack, the chase, and the riders who came to his ranch, looking for him. Sheriff Alden listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each passing detail. When Evan finished, the sheriff stood up. "You did the right thing bringing this to me. We'll handle it." "Caleb needs protection," Evan said. "And his name needs clearing. And he'll get both," Alden promised. Within an hour, the sheriff gathered 2 deputies he trusted. They rode back with Evan toward the ranch, moving quickly but carefully. Back at the ranch, Caleb sat near the fireplace, staring out the window. He had barely slept. Every sound outside made his heart jump. He kept imagining riders returning, breaking through the door, dragging him away. He tried to breathe calmly, but fear made it difficult. When he finally heard horses approaching, he froze. His heart pounded so hard he felt dizzy. But then he heard Rusty bark, not the warning bark from before, but a happy one. Caleb's eyes widened. He pushed himself up with effort and moved toward the window. Evan was back. Relief washed through him so powerfully that he had to steady himself against the wall. When Evan stepped inside, the first thing Caleb said was a quiet, emotional, "You're safe." Evan nodded and helped him sit down. Sheriff Alden entered next, along with the 2 deputies. Caleb looked nervous at first, but the sheriff spoke in a calm voice. "You're protected now," Alden said, "and we're going to bring those men to justice." Before they could discuss more, the sound of horses echoed again from outside. The riders were back, but this time, it wasn't 4. It was 7. They rode fast, stopping in front of the ranch with anger and impatience. The tall rider dismounted roughly and stormed toward the porch. Evan and the sheriff stepped outside before he could knock. "We're looking for a man," the rider said sharply. "And we know he came through here." Sheriff Alden stepped forward calmly. "This ranch is under my authority now. If you have something to say, you'll say it to me." The riders immediately stiffened. They hadn't expected the law to be here. "We're just looking for someone dangerous," the tall rider said, his tone shifting. "Then you came to the wrong place," the sheriff said. "We already know the truth about your business." The rider froze. The others stiffened in fear. In that moment, everything changed. Sheriff Alden signaled his deputies. Within seconds, they positioned themselves strategically. The riders realized they were outnumbered and outmatched. Their confidence collapsed. "You're all coming with us," Alden said firmly. The tall rider tried to resist for a moment, but with deputies moving forward and Evan standing strong beside them, he finally lowered his head in defeat. One by one, the riders were disarmed and arrested. Inside the house, Caleb watched the scene through the window, tears filling his eyes. It was finally over. The fear, the running, the hiding, it all ended right there on Evan's porch. When Evan walked back inside, Caleb couldn't speak. He simply looked at him with deep gratitude. "It's done," Evan said softly. "You're safe now." Caleb covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you." "Very UD." "You don't have to," Evan replied. "Just live your life again." Caleb nodded, wiping his eyes. "I'd like to stay around here, if that's all right." Evan smiled warmly. "I'd like that too." The sheriff later helped Caleb file an official report, clearing his name completely. With time, Caleb recovered fully. He found work in the nearby county and often visited Evan's ranch. What began as a desperate knock on a lonely rancher's door turned into an unexpected bond that changed both their lives. As months passed, the ranch no longer felt empty. There was laughter, conversation, shared meals, and friendship filling the once quiet space. Evan, who had lived alone for years, found someone who understood him. Someone who brought light back into his days. And Caleb found something he never thought he would have again: safety, hope, and a new beginning. Together, they watched the sunrise one quiet morning, standing side by side on the porch. The world looked peaceful again, and for the first time in a long time, both men felt truly free.